Hi everybody. So I am back with the good news that all the other symposia are finished. So apologies for the fact that the health psychology one was running a little bit late, but it has just been finished. So normally people who were attending to that symposium should also be joining us, and we can start the award ceremony. I see that the number of people is increasing, so it means people are switching rooms. We are more than 80 with the presenters at the moment, which is great. So let me also say that after the keynote that was followed by around 150 people, it seems that the same number of people stayed, which is already a great news. So we had up to a maximum of 62 people in a health psychology one. Baptiste told me that the clinical one was 40 plus minus 3. So each responsible person for the symposia gave different ways of reporting the results. And I won't comment about what I received from the cognitive one between Steve and Gilles. You can see between you what is happening. It's really like surveys, you know, political polls. Gilles reported to me that there were more than 50 people, and Steve reported that on average there were 40 people. But whatever the number, it's great. It means that for the 3 symposia, we had about 150 people who were attending. And again, the sessions will be video recorded, so you can have access to the other ones. So now I think it's really time to go to a moment that is always very important at BAPS, the award ceremony. And this year we have many awards to distribute, and I will announce the name of the winners. We will hear 2 talks, but tell me also that the certificate and the physical congratulation will still happen in 2021. It would have been a shame that these people could not be visible physically, and they will be next year. So next year there will be a 2020 and a 2021 award ceremony, during which these people will receive the official certificate of the award. So I will start with the Poster and Talks Award. As you know, in previous BAPS meetings, we always give awards to the best poster presentations. This year, we decided to combine it with the talks presentation. It's actually easier this year to also evaluate the talks, and it would have been a shame that they couldn't be part of the evaluation. So they were also included. And I'm glad that 3 people of the organizing committee, Isabelle Ramdonk, Baptiste Barbeau, and Gilles Vanuscore, were the jury members from different fields, and they had the opportunity to see the PowerPoint on the poster, but also to listen to the video. And the criteria they used to attribute the awards were the clarity and the relevance of the problem statement, including the quality of English, the theoretical framework in the identification of important variables and factors, the quality of the design and the methods, the presentation and the organization with the use of different figures, and the organization and quality of the video, and also the significance of the results, both in terms of originality and impact. And last but not least, and I will insist on that again, another criteria was to be a BAPS member. In order to receive the awards, we ask people also to be to have their membership for the current year. So unfortunately for some people, it means that they could not participate to the award because not being a member, something to think about for next year probably. So after this careful examination, I'm really happy to announce we kept the number of awards, 3, despite the fact that we have less posters this year, because we also wanted to encourage the brave people who accepted the challenge to have a video presentation. I hope these people are there. I saw at least 1 person when I was checking the attendance across the different sessions. So let me just now read the name of the winners and the title of their presentations. The first winner is Roos Arwen Doekemeyer from UGent for her presentation, Start to Stop, the role of trigger failures in reward modulated response inhibition. The second winner is Anaïs Gauthier from UMons for the presentation with the title Source Monitoring and Neuropsychological Deficits in Schizophrenic Patients with and Without Hallucinations. And the third one is Nadia Bodner from KU Leuven with the title Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, which is the fairest of them all? A simulation-based performance comparison of inter-rater agreement measures for binary time series. I suggest that we again use the mic on in order that we can actually congratulate these I suggest, Martin, that you can make a tag on the website so that these three winners can be easily identified on the website, and that can make some focus on the quality of their work. So congratulations to the three of you. So this award ceremony is moving up in terms of seniority in research. You know that we have started a best bachelor thesis some years ago in order to include also not only university but high schools. And so for the best bachelor thesis, we had shortlisted 2 candidates, both coming from the Institut Libre Marie-Apps, Maëlys Rouchet and Aurélie de Wilde. And we had a jury of 3 members, 2 members of the BAPS Executive Committee, Mandy Rossignol from UMONS, and again Gilles Vanuscore, who was really dedicated for jury evaluations. And we also asked Marie van der Hagen from the Institut Libre Marie-Apps to be part of the jury. And the winner of the best bachelor thesis is Aurélie de Wilde, and the title of her thesis is "What are the effects of heterosexism and the vision of the social environment on the parenting project as well as on the construction as a homoparental family?" And the jury particularly appreciates, Aurélie, the quality of the writing of your work, the importance and relevance of the topic, and your ability to critically analyze the scientific value of the data collected. So I don't know if you are with us, I hope so, and I suggest that we can also congratulate you for winning this award. I'm glad to see also that the number of attendees is still reaching, increasing, reaching almost 90 people, so that's great. So let's move now to the best master thesis. So the way we evaluate the master thesis is always a 2-step process. First, there is an evaluation of the summaries that are provided by the candidates, by the executive committee members. We are currently 11 people. And each thesis is assessed by 3 jury members with, to avoid any conflict of interest, none of the evaluators belonging to the university of the candidates. And based on this first selection, we shortlisted 2 people. We shortlisted Arthur Pabst from UC Louvain and Rakoen Maertens from UGent. And I think we can already congratulate the both people, because as I said also, the last years being shortlisted is already a great achievement. So really I see that they have many supporters. So the next step was that we send the shortlisted master thesis to the National Committee for Psychological Science at the Royal Academy for Science. The committee is actually chaired by Bernard Rimé, who was presenting the keynote today. And the National Committee, within the committee, they are selecting jury members in order also to fit the expertise of the jury members with the topics of the candidates. And this year, the jury was chaired by Frank van Overwal, who was a previous BAPS president, by Sarah de Gieter, by Moira Mikola-Jack, and Regine Kolinski. And they selected the thesis of Rakoen Maertens, and the thesis of Rakoen is therefore the winner of the best master thesis. Before clapping, let me just emphasize the reasons why the thesis has been selected. The jury member particularly appreciated the societal importance of the topic, climate change, and you will hear his presentation in a few minutes. It's an extremely important social issue. And because climate change is the product of human behaviors, behavioral sciences have a major role in tackling this problem. And psychology has not done enough. And therefore, Rakoen Thesis contributes to raise behavioral scientists' awareness of their role and their power in addressing this problem. People also emphasize the excellent writing style, the strong analysis of the literature, the quality of the experimental design, the excellent research practices. This is something we pay a particular attention at BAPS. For analysis, pre-registration of the study, and adherence to open science principles. And finally, the critical reflection on the topic and the suggestions for future research and policymakers. So I think you cannot wait any further to hear Rakoen, who will be presenting a summary of his thesis with the title, Can Inoculation Theory be Used to Combat Climate Change Misinformation? And while Rakoen will be loading his presentation, I suggest to applaud him for this wonderful achievement. So a warm congratulations to you, Rakoen. Recording people, if they can switch off the camera and switch off
Ah oui, je voulais savoir le prix des séances, si possible.
Le prix des séances. Okay, I don't understand. Okay, so Rakoen, you can load your presentation, and again, please deactivate your microphone and your video, because I saw someone having his video on. That will facilitate the process. Rakoen, can you hear me?
Yes, all good.
Okay, all good. Okay, the floor is yours.
Can you all see the slides? Is that good?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, welcome everyone to my talk on the title has changed a bit because we moved from the master's dissertation to an actual paper, and this is the title, Combating Climate Change Misinformation, Longevity of Inoculation and Consensus Messaging Effects. There's lots of stuff in there. It is only 10 minutes, so I will have to pack lots of things in a small amount of time. So keep your attention high and fasten your seatbelts, I would say. Okay, you can also tweet about it. You can tag me on Twitter. The slides can be distributed, and so all can be shared. First, a little bit of history. I did my Bachelor of Science and my Master of Science in Experimental Psychology at Ghent University. I could see in the participant list many of my good old teachers, so thank you for that great education. It was a wonderful experience. Now, initially, my master's dissertation was going to be on TMS research, actually motor control, dismantling the interaction between motor preparation, reward, and task difficulty. And I already had a first draft that got some good feedback, yet I changed it. So what happened? So I went on a research internship at the University of Cambridge at the Social Decision Making Lab, which was also part of the second year of the Master of Science at Ghent University. You have to go to a different university, or that's recommended at least, to do some research there. And there I discovered the topics of misinformation, social norms, consensus communication, and also applied to topics such as climate change. And I thought, well, this is really interesting, this is really relevant, this is the direction I want to go to. So I contacted the person on the left, Professor Frederik Ansel, and I asked him, okay, so Frederik, I want to change my master's dissertation. Do you want to become my new supervisor? And he said, yes, let's do it. So thank you, Frederik, I know you're here. Then on the right, you have Sander van der Linden, who was my supervisor during the internship and also currently my PhD supervisor. And I asked him, well, while I'm doing my internship here, can I as well write my master's thesis from Ghent University? And he said, yes, let's do it. So thank you both for your trust and for helping me in this. So as I said, the initial title was, Can Inoculation Theory be Used to Combat Climate Change Misinformation? Now, spoiler, evidence for longevity of inoculation and consensus messaging effects you can see on the bottom. So let's remove the evidence a bit to keep it exciting. What do we have here? We have climate change, a major topic. We have misinformation. We have consensus messaging. We have inoculation messaging. And we have longevity. So all those topics are packed in this one paper. Now let's start with climate change. Devastating effects are already happening. I really recommend you read this report on biodiversity and ecosystems, and you will realize the devastating things that the ecosystems that are already destroyed, the species that are already extinct, and hopefully it motivates you for more action. So there is a major problem, and we know that. Now, there's also consensus on climate change. Namely, 97% of climate scientists agree that climate change is happening and that it's human caused. Now, I know that in Belgium, most of the people would probably have a similar estimate. But if we go to the United States, for example, the perceived scientific consensus is actually 72%. So that's a 25% discrepancy between the real scientific consensus among climate scientists and the perceived scientific consensus. So can we de-bias this belief? So that's where consensus messaging comes in. A consensus message can be simply a pie chart communicating the 97% as if it is a descriptive norm in a way. And you can see that it works. It increases about 16%. This has been replicated copious of times. And it works for conservatives, moderates, liberals, Republicans, the independents, Democrats, people who believe in global warming, people who don't believe in global warming. So yes, communicating consensus works. And does it matter? Yes. In the gateway belief model, we can see that an increase in perceived scientific consensus leads to an increase in belief in climate change, an increase in belief in human causation, an increase in worry about climate change, and finally, more support for action, the thing we actually really need. So, through consensus messaging, the perceived scientific consensus can increase, and via more support for action. So it does matter. Inoculation. What is inoculation? Back in the 60s and the 70s, William McGuire developed this theory. It was during a time of propaganda during the Cold War. And he wanted to design something to develop resistance to persuasion. He designed a vaccine for brainwash, you could say. And the idea was that you have to build up mental resistance by becoming familiar with the misinformation that could be fed into you. So basically, in a very simplified form, there are two major ingredients to our vaccine. A warning message, which is the affective ingredient, telling people do not be fooled, do not fall for the fake news. People will try, but you are better. And then the second ingredient is the weakened dose of misinformation, just like a biological vaccine. You give them the misinformation, but with dissected, with the flaws highlighted. And you do this before the actual exposure to the full dose. So this is why it's pre-bunking and not debunking. This leads to some kind of cognitive strengthening and in the end, resistance to persuasion, the inoculation effect. Good. So can we combine both and what would it look like? In this study here, inoculating the public against misinformation about climate change, the core mechanisms are exactly the same, or not exactly the same, quite similar to our study that I'm going to explain later. So pay attention to the methodology we used here, and then you will understand my paper later. So what happens here is we expose people to a consensus message or a misinformation message. The misinformation message is a fake petition. Well, actually, it's a petition that it's real fake news, you could say. It has been distributed all over the United States. It's the Oregon petition. It says that there is no consensus on human-caused climate change. And it has been signed by over 30,000 American scientists. But if you look in the signatures, you see people such as Charles Darwin or the Spice Girls. So not the most trustworthy signatures, I would say. And there are more flaws with the design. Now, we have an inoculation message specifically designed to pre-bunk that misinformation. It includes the forewarning, telling people you will be exposed to the fake petition, don't be fooled by it, and then the weakened dose of misinformation, basically the content of the petition, but dissected. Good. So again, to remind you of the goal, we want to de-bias the perceived scientific consensus. We want to bring it up. So we hope to see an improvement. We show the real news, the pie chart. We indeed see an increase. We show the fake news. We unfortunately indeed see a decrease. Now, what if you present both side by side? Well, this is the shocking news. It completely neutralizes all the benefit from the real news. So all the benefit from the consensus messaging has been eliminated. Now, if you inject the vaccine in between, you can see that most of the consensus messaging benefit remains intact even after exposure to the fake news. So this is good news. But now the question, what about its longevity? Because all of this was done within a few minutes from each other. What if you wait a week and present the fake news 1 week later? Does it have more or less impact and are you still inoculated against it? So that's where we come in. In this new study, currently under review, pre-registered, open data, open analysis scripts, all our scripts are available on OSF. If you want to have a look and give comments, you are welcome. 2 changes to the design of the study I just presented. First of all, we have a follow-up 1 week later. That's our T3 measure. Then we have the misinformation only presented after the 1 week delay. The measures, we have the T1, it's all perceived scientific consensus. So T1 measure, pre-test at week 1, T2 measure, post-test at week 1, and T3 measure, post-test at week 2. Then the sample size is 479, recruited to prolific and US only, because the previous study was US based and we wanted to have comparable results. All error bars are 95% confidence intervals. Okay, there we go, the results. Now the exciting part. The baseline perceived scientific consensus was 84%, similar across the different groups. Then what about the stability? T1 and T2 and T3 in the control group, a similar perceived scientific consensus over time. Good. The first big question, does the misinformation still work? After 3 years, do we still find a similar effect size? Well, good news or bad news, depending on your interpretation. Yes, the same effect size, D.47, good for our replication, but bad for the fact that the misinformation is still as potent today as it was before. Now, does the consensus effect still work? Yes, it does. We still see an effect size D of 0.71. Good news. Now, brand new data, never been published before. What happens if you wait 1 week? Does the consensus effect decay? The big question. And yes, unfortunately, we see a significant decay in the consensus effect. But a more important question, is it still significant even after the decay? Do we still see the consensus effect? And the response is yes, luckily we still see it. So there is partial decay and not complete decay. Now, if after this decayed consensus message, we present a fake news message, what happens then? Well, it neutralizes the benefit from the consensus message. So again, this is similar as in the initial study, and it doesn't really change that it's 1 week later, and that's in this case. Now, what about the inoculation effect? This is the final question. Can we protect people against fake news presented 1 week later? And the response is yes, we protect the entire decayed consensus effect. So good news, conclusions. Consensus effect replicated, but there is partial decay over time. The inoculation effect replicated, and there is full retention over the course of 1 week. Now, to summarize all findings in one nice little difference score plot, here we go. Again, the goal is to increase the perceived scientific consensus. We present fake news, we see a decrease. We present real news, the pie chart, we see an increase. We wait 1 week and we see partial decay, unfortunately, but it's still up, it's still positive and significant. We present fake news, neutralizes the benefit of the consensus effect. We provide a vaccine at week 1, present fake news at week 2, and we see that it saves the consensus effect. That's it. Thank you for listening, and feel free to contact me or Twitter, tweet, and anything is welcome. So questions now, I guess the floor is open. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rakoen, for this excellent talk. You did a great job. So we have time for a few questions. I suggested people to send questions through the chat, but I don't see any questions right now. So please don't hesitate. You can also open up your mic. It should be working fine. So if you want immediately to ask a question, just start your mic and you can ask your question. Maybe just to warm up the floor, could you comment on the way your research is received in the media, or maybe also in some political instances? Do you get some feedbacks about that in addition to the scientific work itself?
Yes, that's a good question. As most of the research now is based in the UK, as I'm at Cambridge at the moment. I only know about the UK press, and indeed we do get some positive press. The BBC wrote an article on Cambridge researchers found a vaccine against fake news and big headlines. So it did get some media traction. In fact, what gets more attention is we also developed a game you can actually play to vaccinate yourself against different forms of misinformation. You can actually play it at getbadnews.com. I can put it in the chat if that helps. That uses the same inoculation theory principles. Now, on the climate science front, there may be a bit less attention, and there is this general. We have a few articles on the benefit of inoculation and so on in general, but I haven't seen anything translated in climate science policy with relation to inoculation against misinformation on climate change. There are lots of researchers doing research on more efficient debunking, and that gets quite a bit of attention. But I guess the next challenge is to translate the pre-bunking principle into good policy. But in Belgium, that's a good question, actually. Maybe I should do some more work on disseminating this research in Belgium as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. I see there is a question from Annalisa. I will read it. She's asking, do you think there could be cultural differences concerning these effects?
Yes, that's a very good question. So the inoculation theory. So basically, inoculation theory has been studied for over 40 years, actually over 50 years now. And it has been done in various Western samples. But indeed, so it seems to be valid in the US and the UK. In one of our more recent studies, we also compared some European countries, Germany and Poland, and seems to work there as well, although it was not tailored to climate change misinformation. But in general, indeed, it is a bit understudied, the intercultural or the cultural differences in the inoculation effect, and especially in relation to climate change and perceived scientific consensus, because the focus is often in the United States, as there the perceived scientific consensus is quite low. But I suppose we could find similar things in Belgium. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know if there is, someone is indicating that there will be more about Rakoen study tomorrow in the TAID. So another important issue is that our meeting findings seems to find a high impact in the newspapers, because in the health psychology symposium also there was a lot of attention in the different newspapers. So that's very important indeed. Is there any last pressing question from the audience? If not, we will move then to the next award. And Rakoen, please keep an eye on the date of our physical meeting, because we hope you can travel to Belgium to receive the award in the spring of 2021.
Thank you, Olivier. Thank you, everyone.
So let's move now to the Early Career Award. And this is a very important moment for the association, because it's actually the first time ever that BAPS is attributing the Early Career Award. This was actually a decision that has been taken by the previous executive committee, and the current executive committee had this mission to implement the action. This award recognizes the scientific excellence of researchers in psychological science up to 6 years after their PhD. And we consider that 3 main criteria should be considered. The first one is the level of scientific achievements, which includes, as you can imagine, publications, but I want to insist we had a special focus on the quality of the publications and not purely on the quantity. We also, the other criteria were obtention of grants, awards, invited talks, and also supervision of master or PhD students. The second aspect was the originality and the innovativeness of the work. Combination of methods, the research question, whether there was an interdisciplinary approach. Could we consider that the work is creating a momentum in the field? What is the impact? And what is also the proof of independence of this young researcher? And we added a third criterion, which was actually really important, because we had so excellent applications that it was sometimes difficult to disentangle. So we had a third criteria, which was the societal relevance. Were there any tool developments related to the research? Were there any training sessions to implement some aspect of the research? What about the dissemination for a broad audience or media contributions? In total, we received 13 applications, which was really good for a first call, covering 5 main domains: clinical, cognitive health, social psychology, and cognitive neuroscience. In order to assess applications without any possible conflict of interest, especially in a small country like Belgium, and also to give the prize an international recognition, we asked the support of the Board of Scientific Affairs at EFPA, the European Federation of Psychological Associations, to select jury members within their national associations for the 5 domains that were covered by the applications of this year. And we were really happy to have very positive answers from associations from 5 different countries. And so the jury was composed by Anders Hovland from Bergen University in Norway, representing the domain of clinical psychology, Daniel Sanabria from the University of Granada in Spain for the domain of cognitive psychology, Julia Allen from the University of Aberdeen in the UK for health psychology, Jonas Olofsson from Stockholm University in Sweden for neuroscience, and Imo Fritsche from Leipzig University in Germany for social psychology. And based on a thorough examination of all the documents, and there were many we asked to the candidate provided by these different candidates, and a fine grain, and believe me, it needed to be a fine grain comparison along the 3 criteria, the jury selected Peter van Dessel as the winner of the BAPS Early Career Award 2020. Again, before opening your mics, I just want to highlight the major reasons for giving the prize to Peter. First, the innovative theorizing and empirical testing about motivated cognition, which is challenging the leading models in the field with broad implications for areas beyond cognitive and social psychology. Secondly, the broad relevance of the work across multiple disciplines, both for theory and intervention. Third, the impressive publication output, both in quantitative and qualitative terms, invariably well-written and theoretically sophisticated, generally well-cited, and achieving momentum in the field. And finally, the strong overall CV with a noteworthy commitment to open science and experience outside of academia as well. And the jury wanted to congratulate the winner and wish him a bright future in academia, but they also wanted to really congratulate all the candidates because we really received excellent applications. And the jury, but also on behalf of BAPS, I would like to also congratulate all the applicants for the quality of their work. So let's congratulate all the applicants, and especially Peter, you can now open your mic. Yay! Pleasure to leave the floor to Peter with presentation with the title Inference Training, a new theory-based form of cognitive bias modification to foster adaptive behavioral choices. The floor is yours, Peter.
Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I hope you can hear me well enough. Let me first express my gratitude for your kind words, Olivier, and of course for this award. BAPS is a great honor and a privilege, so thank you to the association for their consideration. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Jan de Houwer, whose excellent guidance, helpful advice steered my career from the beginning, so many thanks. I would also like to thank FAO Flanders for providing the opportunity to make my research projects come true, and all my collaborators and everyone at Ghent University, current and previous members of the Lip Lab who all helped make working on these projects a pleasure. So thanks again, it is an absolute privilege to receive this award. Now in this presentation, I would like to give you a short overview of a topic that I've been working on under the title of Inference Training as a new type of cognitive bias modification intervention. So it is well known that people often engage in behavior that is maladaptive or harmful in one way or another. For instance, some people drink way more than is good for them. Some people indulge in unhealthy food eating, and some people even physically harm themselves. Now, often people know that these behaviors aren't good for them, and they may even want to change them, but for some reason they are unable to do so. So it still presents a key challenge for psychological science to explain and help modify such behavior. Well, it is in this regard that cognitive bias modification interventions have emerged. And the original idea was that both controlled and automatic processes determine behavior, but the automatic processes may very strongly contribute to maladaptive behavior. Now, while regular psychotherapy might mainly be targeting more controlled motivational processes, CBM might target automatic biases in cognitive processes, like automatic biases in a person's propensity to readily respond to stimuli in the environment, such as one's spontaneous tendency to grab things that one craves for, like chocolate chip cookies, for instance. Now, traditional CBM theories have drawn on the idea of automatic associative processes. They considered that the automatic mental processes underlying maladaptive behavior, they involve the automatic activation of associations or mental links between representations in memory. So for instance, alcoholics may have a strong association between representations of alcohol on the one hand and positivity or positive concepts such as approach. An automatic activation of this association may drive their drinking behavior. Now, these associations, they were taught to be learned on the basis of co-occurrences or pairings. So they were considered to be highly relevant. Okay, so it seems like the presentation has stopped for a moment. Sorry about that. Let me just share this again. And start off where we were, because that would help. Okay, so here's where we left it. So the idea was basically that associations were taught to be learned on the basis of co-occurrences or pairings, such as the pairings that people have when they drink with positive things. And these associations were considered highly resistant, as they were learned on the basis of many pairings that may have occurred in people's lives. So for instance, when one drinks alcohol, and drinking consistently co-occurs with positive events over and over again, it might create a very strong association that always grows stronger and underlies alcoholic behavior, but is very resistant or difficult to change. Now, many CBM treatments have therefore targeted automatic processes by trying to modify existing associations, as should be best achieved via these repeated pairings. So as one prominent example, in some therapies, patients have been given computer tasks in which negative actions like avoidance were paired with specific stimuli. So for instance, in some alcohol clinics, alcohol-dependent patients completed many sessions in which they repeatedly avoided pictures of alcoholic stimuli by pushing them away from themselves with a joystick and doing this over and over again. Now, this new CBM approach has initially led to some success, with some evidence for reduced relapse in patients. And this has led to a surge in the popularity of these types of interventions in recent years. Now, in some of my previous research and in the research of others, these ideas were put to the test. And importantly, findings were often inconsistent with predictions derived from these traditional associative cognitive bias modification theories. So for instance, consistent pairing via CBM does not always produce success. In many contexts, no effects of pairings were found, and sometimes even atypical effects were found. So as an example, one training to consistently avoid chocolate has been found to produce stronger tendencies to approach rather than to avoid chocolate. Another interesting finding was that in some studies that do find effects, these effects do not require the pairing, but effects can, for instance, also be observed on the basis of mere instructions. So merely saying that one will always approach certain stimuli in an upcoming task can already lead to more positive responses towards the to-be-approached stimuli. Furthermore, it was also found that people's beliefs seem to strongly determine effects, such as beliefs about the contingencies that are present in the training, like whether people believe that they more often approached than avoided certain stimuli, or also beliefs about how training might achieve effects, like the belief that the training might rewire people's own cognitions. So all this research culminated in an alternative view, namely the view that effects of CBM interventions might not depend on a rewiring of learned mental associations, but rather depend on inferential processes. So from this perspective, behavior depends on the inferences that people make, such as inferences about the outcomes of specific actions. For instance, a person might have bad thoughts, and these bad thoughts may cue a person's inference that alcohol drinking may help them cope with these bad thoughts. And such inferences may then drive drinking behavior. Now, in typical CBM, effects might occur because CBM can lead to the formation of new beliefs and evoke more adaptive inferences. So, for example, constantly avoiding alcoholic drinks might not produce its effects because the pairings lead to automatic association formation, but because some people make inferences based on the pairings. They might infer, for instance, that they should avoid alcohol in real life, or that they will be more able to do so after the training. And these inferences may then transfer to real life, evoking CBM effects in some circumstances and for some people. Because based on this new inferential theory, it makes sense that current CBM does not always produce the wanted effects, because it does not require this learning of inferences. Instead, it can produce effects under certain circumstances. So for instance, implementation in clinics rather than for scientific purposes might lead to stronger beliefs in the intervention, therefore stronger effects which accord with recent findings that CBM indeed works better in the clinic. So we believe that CBM might be useful, but to the extent that it allows new inferences that can evoke more adaptive real-life behavior. Now, from this perspective, there might be merit in a new approach to CBM, in which it is really assured that certain wanted inferences are learned and practiced. Similar to how one would consistently practice when learning a new language, or when learning to drive a car, or when learning mathematics, one could also practice adaptive inferences that may evoke adaptive behavior. And this would be achieved in what can be called inference training interventions, where we practice adaptive inferences. Now, of course, the key behind getting such inference training to work would be that it targets the most important adaptive inferences. So what are these adaptive inferences, and how can we target them? Well, drawing on goal-directed theory, behavior chiefly depends on inferences about expected outcomes of actions and their value. So we should train inferences about the positive and negative consequences of actions. Importantly, in contrast to the dual process view that informed early CBM interventions, these inferential processes might actually be highly automatic. And according to currently popular predictive coding theories, people may very automatically predict what behavior they will emit in a given context. And this automatic prediction determines behavior. So from this perspective, contextual influences also determine what actions people predict they will make. In a bar, I predict I will drink alcohol, and this evokes my behavior. So here, maladaptive behavior may occur because people do not take into account all possible goals they might have, but they infer their behavior and possible outcomes of this behavior based on contextual influences. Hence, it could be of key importance to try and train automatic prediction of adaptive actions in important contexts. Now, based on these ideas, the key inferences to target in inference training, that would be inferences that people will act in a certain, more adaptive way given certain consequences. So for instance, people may need to learn to infer that they will drink water rather than alcohol when in a bar, given that this better serves their main goals. Now, in contrast to typical CBM, in inference training, we require people to make adaptive inferences. They need to make them in order to complete a certain task, and they do so in a relevant context. So the approach here is more similar to traditional therapies, where maladaptive beliefs are disconfirmed and more adaptive thinking is reinforced. However, in inference training, people are trained to repeatedly make very specific inferences in a relevant environment. As an initial test of inference training, we performed a study in which we trained inferences that might underlie adaptive behavior in the context of choosing healthy or unhealthy foods. Here we had participants imagine that they were a self-chosen avatar, and we then told them that in the avatar task they had one important goal: to make themselves as healthy as possible. Now, each trial, they would see the avatar stand in front of the fridge, and a food would come out of the fridge, and they would be able to choose to consume this food or to put it back in the fridge. Importantly, after choosing, they would see the action and the consequence for their goal to be healthy. Now, their goal was served only if they chose to consume healthy foods and not unhealthy foods, because this reduced their health. So in this training, we targeted the inference that taking unhealthy foods from the fridge can make them feel bad and unhealthy, and that they will therefore choose not to take those foods. Now, when we had participants complete one session of this training, we found evidence that later on they indeed ate less unhealthy foods, which differed from what we found for control conditions and for traditional CBM. So providing initial evidence for the potential utility of this training. Now, an important thing to note is that the goal of inference training is to help modify real-life behavior. But as we know, real-life behavior depends on many things, depends on many contextual influences, depends on many different goals, many different action outcomes, etc. So it therefore seems quite plausible that to evoke lasting behavior change based on this training, training needs to be personalized, or at least matched with real-life behavior to the best as we can. Now, to do so, as is done in applied behavior analyses, we can try to achieve personally relevant training by relating behavior to A, B, and C, which are antecedent contexts, behavioral choices, and consequences. So behavior such as smoking can be related to an antecedent context that is personally relevant to a person, like maybe they smoke when feeling depressed or when they see others smoke. Can also be related to B, the behavioral choices that are personally relevant, and C, to consequences. Consequences that again should be personally relevant to the person. Now, for instance, in the context of smoking addiction, people can be trained in an antecedent context that is relevant for them, such as when they see other people smoke. And there they might learn to infer that they will choose a relevant behavioral alternative. Now, we are now setting up these types of studies, testing effectiveness of inference training for smoking and for alcohol addiction, in which we first provide smokers and alcoholics which questions probing these ABCs. And we then provide personalized inference training, such as here, where they would see a self-chosen avatar, and it is sitting in an antecedent context they chose, like right after dinner, and they need to choose which action they want to do, to accord with a self-selected goal, in this case, to be happy. Now, if they would choose to smoke, they would see the action and how this would negatively affect their goals. Now, studies testing this are still ongoing, so results are still to be determined. But to summarize, inference training is an alternative to cognitive bias modification that targets very specific automatic inferences about actions and action outcomes. This training can be implemented such that it is personally relevant and that it is theory-based. We can draw on many different types of theories, but we believe that it is important that inferences are targeted in a way that accords with theories such as goal-directed theory, predictive coding theory, and ABC theories of behavior. Now, this new approach could be implemented in many different applied contexts, and it might have potential given some initial results, but of course, this requires further study. So I want to thank you all for your attention and say thank you to my collaborators on some of the discussed studies, and I would now be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks a lot, Peter, with your very inspiring talk, both at the theoretical and at the applied level. I think it's exactly what we expected for such presentation of an award, that it would be highly accessible from all fields of psychology. So you really did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have some time for questions or for comments. So please, I see comments coming, and congratulations. If you have questions, I think the easiest is just to open your mic rather than using the chat. So I open the floor. I hope you would have questions or comments. Maybe while people are thinking about their questions, you can maybe elaborate on the future developments you want to give to your research in the next years, and how you see yourself evolving in the type of approach or the types of applications you would like to emphasize in the next years.
Well, I think there are many pathways that we can go into because there are so many different areas where we could try to apply this. We are now doing this in the case of addiction because I think that is where CBM has been developed in the first instance and has shown some potential. So we are starting there, but I don't think we need to limit ourselves there, because we believe that maybe these adaptive inferences are important in any aspect of people's behavior. So it will be important to really pan out, okay, where do we want to change people's behavior? Where do we want to make it more adaptive, and how can we do so? Where do we have good theories about what are the inferences that can be trained and how can we train them? So this is what I want to do. This is what I will do in the future, is just look at many different areas where we can try to apply this and see where it has potential and where it doesn't. Because of course there can be contexts in which it's simply not possible to make important changes. But well, mainly just try and test and see where it goes. And when we do this, when we test it in these different places, in these different contexts, that will also help to develop our theory better, right? Because we're drawing on these many different theoretical perspectives, because we want to take as much as we can from what we know on the basis of previous research. But it will be important to try and integrate all of that into a theory that just makes it easier for clinicians, for instance, to do this type of training also in their therapies that they do, to just provide them with a very clear theoretical framework and very clear guidelines that can help them do this this type of training.
Thank you. And now there is a question from Sabrina. I will read the question. Could you explain again in the choices to make why the avatar feeling bad would change people's behavior if this is not a consequence felt in real life?
Okay, well, there the idea is mainly that what is important again is that the consequences that people learn, that they are relevant to themselves as well. So this is why we are starting up this more personally relevant type of inference training, where we're really trying to target what people find important. So they need to have this idea of, okay, when I smoke, what happens to me is something that I don't like, and just getting people to be very quick and yeah, very automatically infer that these types of consequences will help, might already relate to what will happen in behavior. It's the idea that if people learn to predict their own behavior and do so in relevant contexts, because it has different consequences, and here you can be very broad, you can train many different consequences, you can train many different outcomes, but always it's coming to the same outcome, that people need to do the adaptive behavior in order to do what is asked of them, in order to get this task to work, so that people will learn based on this task. Okay, I will now learn this type of behavior and I will do it in relevant contexts as well. But of course, what is important here is that it is behavior that is difficult for them to do, but that they might want to do. At least that's what we think is an important factor in this type of training, is that people have some sort of motivation. I'm not sure if we can train up this motivation, something that has to be determined in future studies, I guess. But at least for what we found with typical CBM, or what has been found, is that it is much better if people are motivated to some extent. And people will be motivated if there are certain outcomes that they know are relevant to them. And just teaching them that these outcomes will be served if they do that action, and therefore they will do it, might help to change their behavior. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I don't see other questions, but maybe there is still one question. Don't hesitate to write it in the chat or just open up your mic. It doesn't seem that there are further questions. Yes, there is one. From Rakoen Maertens. Why is it very important that people spontaneously infer the consequence of their behavior rather than, for instance, instructed or observed?
That's a good question. So, well, that's again, that it's based on this idea of predictive coding theory, for instance, that is important that people learn that they will perform certain behavior. You need to try and basically kind of persuade someone that they will do a certain behavior. And when they are merely instructed, or when they merely observe behavior, it's not necessarily the case that people will also infer that they will do that specific behavior in real life. So in a context where they are not instructed, or in a context where it is not observed. So of course people can learn on the basis of observations, people can learn on the basis of instructions, and I think that that's very important. But it might also be important that people basically learn to do things themselves, learn to infer that they will perform certain types of behavior under certain circumstances, in certain contexts, which is something that, well, I think when doing persuasion or with instructions might not always be the case. You don't update your prediction error, if we want to talk in predictive coding theories, that if you perform an action and do so yourself, this is different from what typically happens in real life, because you have a reason why it is different now. You got an instruction to do so, right? So this is why maybe training it in these types of contexts could have some additional benefit. But again, it is an interesting question, and it is something that will require future research and further investigation.
Great. I see that there is an additional question. However, we are a little bit running out of time because we started 10 minutes late, but it's only 1:10, and you know that there is still another activity with the General Assembly, and some of us have to do a few things in between. So my suggestion is that this question, you will actually see it in the chat, Peter, and then I guess you can immediately answer to Claudia about the question through the chat. So I would like to congratulate you again for this excellent presentation, and I very much hope we see you physically next year at the BAPS meeting in Louvain-la-Neuve, where you will receive the certificate for this first early award career from BAPS. Thanks a lot.
Thank you again.
So let me just take 2 minutes to close this meeting by saying first that I think it was really an overall great success. At each level, we had many people attending. So for the last session, we had between 80 and 90 people, which is really great. And I hope you all enjoy these different sessions. Any feedback to us will be highly welcome, of course. It's not really that we want to have other virtual annual meetings, but just in case, or it can elicit some ideas about other activities we can provide, like workshops through virtual conferences. So please send your feedbacks about it. The videos will be available in the next days about the sessions you couldn't attend. So just go to the website and you will see them available. Don't forget the General Assembly that will start after 2. And I really want to invite also non-members to attend the General Assembly. This is a way to see all the activities we are doing. And the only thing for which non-members cannot really participate is that we will have to vote for the modification of the status. But other than that, everybody is welcome, and hopefully it will motivate you to become at least a member, and even more an active member in one of our boards. And so see you next year for this physical meeting that will be, as Martin said, very exciting, with the already accepted papers, probably additional symposia and additional papers and posters, and also a very important anniversary. It will be the 75th anniversary of BAPS. So it will be clearly an important event for the society, but also for the community of researchers in psychological sciences in Belgium. I don't know, Martin or Annalisa, if you want to add anything before I officially close this first virtual BAPS meeting. Doesn't seem so. My suggestion for the General Assembly is that we start. Oh, yes, I see Annalisa. Maybe that you want.
Yeah, just a very quick thank you to everybody for attending. Everybody for presenting, because actually at the beginning we received quite a lot of answer of people quite stressed with this idea of having a virtual conference, but everything was very fine, and the 3 symposium I just moved around. The three symposium were great with very nice participation. So thank you very much to have played the game. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Annalisa, and let me also thank the whole organizing committee for making this happening. I think we had indeed some stress at some moments with some trials, but finally everything went really well. And I also hope that you all enjoyed it.